Welcome to Season 3 of On the Mic with Dr. H, the Global Mentor Coach, and you're listening to Business Basics. This podcast is dedicated to helping you grow your business. The first 2 seasons was a reboot of my podcast, and we're still learning from my mistakes. As I entered 2019, I grew and really got some depth to my podcast. In Season 3, we're going to revisit those episodes and talk about the growth. What good is a podcast if we're not learning and growing, right? I said it in Season 2, and I'll say it now. There's value in learning from other people's mistakes. We get caught up in wanting things to be perfect and just right, as we should as entrepreneurs. But here's the thing. Entrepreneurs are perfectly imperfect, and that's the fuel to our resiliency. We recognize our flaws and build on them to make ourselves better, stronger, and forces to be reckoned with. It's the last episode of the season, and I've enjoyed being transparent with you. I couldn't think of a better episode to close out the season than the Goldman Sachs Malaysia scandal. Take a listen.
And welcome back to another episode of On the Mic with Dr. H. We're talking about business basics. Listen, I was very, very shocked when I read about Goldman Sachs and what's going on with them in Malaysia. If you don't know, Goldman Sachs backed a Malaysian fund that turned into one of the biggest scandals in financial history. And it's kind of reviving that whole conversation about, are you too big to jail? You know, it's really, really interesting. The Malaysian government on Monday filed criminal charges against Goldman Sachs. They accused the bank of making false and misleading statements when it raised money for the fund called One Malaysia Development Berhad, or 1MDB. The immediate consequences of the Malaysian charges against Goldman subsidiaries are likely to be limited, but the action will stir up discussion about how United States prosecutors should proceed and whether they should bring criminal charges against Goldman. It's interesting because American prosecutors have secured a guilty plea so far from a former senior Goldman investment banker and filed money laundering and bribery charges against another former employee. So it's not really clear right now what kind of actions that will happen against Goldman Sachs as a firm. But listen, it's possible that they may seek a punishment that deters similar misconduct, which means some $2.7 billion was misappropriated by the 2 employees from the $6.5 billion that the bank raised for 1MDB. So there's just all kinds of criminal activity, some issues going on here. And so let's talk about this question, because it does raise a powerful question. I'm reading from the New York Times. Why are criminal charges against a company such a big deal? And so listen, it all boils down to ethical behavior. And this makes sense as to when you see stuff like this, it really makes a lot of sense as to why companies do such strenuous background checks and financial checks, especially if you're dealing with money of any kind. They dig some more. Why? Because they're looking for credible people. When you're dealing with this level of money, listen, it does things to people. Similar things have happened, like during the financial crisis of 2008. It was a big deal. Charges were brought against large banks, but those things held off. People were held off. As far as criminal actions, but civil actions resulted in multi-billion-dollar fines. And so sometimes it's like, do you hit them in the pockets, or do you hit them with jail time, or do you hit them with both? It's a matter of what do you do, you know what I mean, in these situations. So are criminal charges against Goldman Sachs even likely? Who knows? People still feel like banks are too big to jail, but individual people are not. And the question is, and I agree, a law professor at Notre Dame asks, how do you really put in place some kind of deterrent? because prosecutors want to deter wrongdoing on Wall Street. But how? How? To do so means they need to focus on getting jail time for individuals convicted of white collar crime. But I mean, at some point, I agree, somebody has to go to prison. But when it comes to, and that happens. But when was the last time you've heard of a bank losing their license? Banks don't lose their license. And sometimes they don't care about losing, paying a hefty fine. They should, but they don't. So I'm really, really surprised at what's happening. It says U.S., I'm reading from Business Insider now. It says U.S. and Malaysian authorities, as well as those in the UK, Australia, and Singapore, among others, are continuing to figure out just what happened and who's responsible. Billions of dollars in missing cash. I'm glad to see, of course, that, Goldman Sachs is cooperating, and I really don't expect anything less, but this is what's interesting me. It says somehow actor Leonardo DiCaprio, model Miranda Kerr, and the estate of Jean-Michel Basquiat got dragged into the mess as well. Very, very interesting to see. And so I'd like to know how this plays out. It's unfortunate that so many people are, involved in this issue, but this is something that, you come to expect more from companies like this. But at the end of the day, how much more how much more screening can you do? What are some other things that can happen? You also got to think about, what's happening among employees. How are you making sure they're okay to make, what are the checks and balances that are in place within your own company, to make sure that things are okay. And so it seems like a lot of these people who have gotten kind of caught into the crosshairs have been, they genuinely invested in what they believed, was the right thing. It was, hey, Goldman Sachs, they have a reputation. This is a company with a solid reputation of money management and, growing your wealth. So what could this potentially do to the reputation of Goldman Sachs? Malaysia's ruling coalition faces up to $10.5 billion in debt repayments linked to the state investment fund and is grappling with a weak fiscal position. Having revised the 2018 fiscal deficit from 2.8% to 3.7% in the latest budget issued in early November. The country has canceled major infrastructure projects, including 2 oil and gas pipelines and a $795 million pipeline linking the state of Malacca to a Petronas refinery and petrochemical plant in the state of Johor in order to balance its books. So they're already struggling financially. And this is just another kick. So, you got to think about this. And so from a business standpoint, you need to make sure there are always checks and balances in place. And there's always accountability. I'm reminded of when I think Regina King asked Will Smith in that movie, who's monitoring the monitors of the monitors? There should always be a system in place of people, constant accountability, so you don't have this going on. And so as you get your business going, this is something that you can learn from. I encourage you to follow this story carefully because it is going to be an issue for years to come. It's going to lay some foundation and some groundwork, and it may change the tides for sure as it relates to that whole industry, but also just learning business basics and just the importance of making sure you have things in place and you're holding people accountable every step of the way. Okay. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Business Basics. You've been on the mic with Dr. H, the Global Mentor Coach. I appreciate you for tuning in. Hey, if you like the podcast, you can actually support it now. I really appreciate it. You guys have been sharing it, and I really appreciate listening. Viewership, listeners are up, but hey, it's time to go ahead and start supporting it on a whole nother level. And we look forward to seeing the podcast grow and grow and grow. If you have some topics, some issues, some information that you'd like me to cover, feel free to reach out to me. Email me at info@globalmentorcoach.com. Again, that's info@globalmentorcoach.com. Send me your topics and let me know what you'd like to hear me cover on this podcast, because it's not about me, but it's all about you and making sure that you have the business basics you need to be successful. Again, thanks for tuning in with me, Dr. Ace, the Global Mentor Coach. Until next time, remember to spread lots of love and light.
The overarching theme this season was me getting comfortable with my microphone position and not sitting so closely to it. In the last 2 episodes, I wasn't too close to the microphone. Another theme this season was a lot of breathing and silence. I also struggled to find the words to express myself in some of the episodes. As you build your podcast or your business, be confident. Don't overdo it. Get organized. Get help. Follow a plan. Something that happened in this season was a progression in the content. Did you notice how the content grew? Did you notice how the episodes grew in length? They got longer and longer. I went from talking about personal experiences to business news. I'm excited for you to continue on this journey with me as we head into season 4. Thanks for listening to Business Basics. This season's episodes built on seasons 1 and 2 to teach some business fundamentals to help you define and strengthen your brand while learning from my podcasting mistakes from day 1. Go ahead and like and share this podcast and spread the word about Business Basics. I sincerely appreciate your support and your listening ear. If there are topics you'd like me to cover, or if you need a business coach, email me at info@globalmentorcoach.com. Again, thanks for tuning in with me, Dr. H, the Global Mentor Coach. Remember to spread lots of love and light. Until next time.